Listen to me very carefully because what I'm about to tell you could save you from financial destruction. If you have money sitting in savings accounts, checking accounts, or certificates of deposit earning 2, 3, or 4% interest, you are being systematically impoverished by forces beyond your control. And most people have no idea this is happening to them. The economic environment of 2026 is unlike anything we've experienced in modern history. We're facing a perfect storm of currency debasement, asset price inflation, and structural economic changes that make traditional safe investments the riskiest strategy of all. What your parents and grandparents considered prudent money management will destroy your wealth faster than any market crash ever could. I've been warning about this for years, but now we're at the critical point where the cost of financial ignorance becomes catastrophic. Every month you keep substantial amounts of money idle, you're losing purchasing power permanently. This isn't temporary, this isn't cyclical, this is a fundamental shift in how money works in the modern economy. The rules have changed, and most people are still playing by the old rules that no longer apply. Banks are paying you pennies in interest while inflation steals dollars from your purchasing power. Government bonds that were once considered safe are now guaranteed wealth destroyers. Even money market funds and high-yield savings accounts are falling behind the real cost of living increases. If you're serious about protecting your wealth and maintaining your standard of living, you need to subscribe to this channel right now and pay attention to what I'm about to reveal. Because the strategy I'm going to share isn't just about growing your money, it's about preventing the systematic erosion of everything you've worked your entire life to build. Let me start by explaining exactly what's happening to your idle money and why traditional safe investments have become wealth destroyers. The Federal Reserve and central banks around the world have created an environment where savers are punished and debtors are rewarded. This is intentional policy designed to stimulate economic activity, but it's destroying the financial security of responsible people who save money. Here's the mathematical reality that most people refuse to face. If inflation is running at 6% annually and your savings account is paying 3% interest, you're losing 3% of your purchasing power every single year. That means your money loses almost 30% of its value every decade, even though the nominal balance stays the same or grows slightly. But the real situation is much worse because official inflation numbers are manipulated to appear lower than the actual cost increases that ordinary people experience. Housing, healthcare, education, energy, food, all the things you actually need to buy are rising much faster than the reported inflation rate. Your real purchasing power loss is probably closer to 5 to 8% annually. This means that money sitting in traditional safe investments is experiencing negative real returns of 5 to 8% every year. Compound that over a decade, and you're looking at a 50% loss in purchasing power. Your $100,000 in savings will buy what $50,000 bought 10 years ago, even though your bank statement shows the same number. The second factor destroying idle money is currency debasement through money printing. Governments around the world are creating money out of thin air to fund their spending programs and service their debts. Every new dollar created reduces the value of every existing dollar in circulation. This is simple mathematics that most people ignore because the effects are gradual and invisible. Since 2020, the money supply has increased by unprecedented amounts. Trillions of dollars have been created and pumped into the financial system. This money doesn't disappear. It competes with your existing money for the same goods and services, driving prices higher and reducing your purchasing power. The people who understand this are moving their money out of cash and into assets that maintain their value during currency debasement. Real estate, stocks, commodities, precious metals, anything that represents real economic value rather than paper promises. The people who don't understand this are watching their wealth evaporate slowly but steadily. The third factor is what economists call financial repression. Governments are deliberately keeping interest rates below the inflation rate to reduce the real cost of servicing their enormous debts. This forces savers to subsidize government spending through the hidden tax of purchasing power erosion. This isn't a conspiracy theory, this is stated government policy. Federal Reserve officials openly discuss using negative real interest rates to stimulate borrowing and discourage saving. They want you to spend or invest your money rather than keeping it in cash, and they're using inflation to force you to make that choice. The fourth factor is technological disruption that's changing the fundamental nature of money and value storage. Cryptocurrencies, digital assets, and blockchain technologies are creating new forms of money that compete with traditional currencies. While most of these are speculative and volatile, they're attracting capital away from traditional safe investments. More importantly, central banks are developing digital currencies that will give governments unprecedented control over how people save and spend money. When these digital currencies are implemented, they could eliminate privacy and autonomy in financial transactions while making it easier for governments to confiscate wealth through negative interest rates or direct taxation. The fifth and most dangerous factor is the approaching debt crisis that will force governments to choose between defaulting on their obligations or inflating away their debts. With government debt levels at historic highs and continuing to grow unsustainably, the mathematical endpoint is either bankruptcy or massive currency debasement. Neither option is good for people holding cash or government bonds. If governments default, bondholders lose their principal. If governments inflate away their debts, cash holders lose their purchasing power. Either way, traditional safe investments become wealth destroyers rather than wealth preservers. This isn't some distant future scenario. We're already seeing the early stages of this crisis playing out in countries around the world. Currency collapses, hyperinflation, bank failures, government defaults. What's happening in other countries will eventually happen in developed economies too, because the underlying mathematical problems are universal. The sixth factor is demographic changes that are reducing the number of workers relative to retirees, creating structural pressures for higher spending and money printing. As populations age, governments face enormous unfunded liabilities for pensions and healthcare that can only be met through borrowing and money creation. This demographic reality means that the pressures for currency debasement and financial repression will continue for decades. There's no political solution that doesn't involve either massive tax increases that destroy economic growth or money printing that destroys purchasing power. Understanding these six factors is crucial because they explain why the old rules about money management no longer apply. What worked for previous generations who lived through periods of stable currencies and positive real interest rates will destroy wealth for people living through the current period of currency chaos and financial manipulation. The solution isn't to panic or make reckless investments. The solution is to systematically move money out of idle cash positions and into assets that maintain their value during periods of currency debasement and inflation. But this requires understanding which assets actually provide protection and which ones are just different forms of speculation. Now let me tell you exactly what to do with your idle money to protect it from the wealth destruction I just described. This isn't about getting rich quick or making speculative bets. This is about preserving and growing your purchasing power in an environment where traditional safe investments are guaranteed wealth destroyers. The first strategy is to deploy money into dividend growth stocks that have the pricing power to pass increased costs on to customers. Not just any dividend stocks, but companies with strong competitive moats, essential products or services, and long track records of raising dividends faster than inflation. These businesses effectively print their own money by increasing prices and dividends annually. Focus on companies like Microsoft, Apple, Johnson & Johnson, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble. These are businesses that sell products people need regardless of economic conditions, and they have the brand strength and market position to raise prices when their costs increase. When you own shares of these companies, you own a piece of businesses that can inflate their revenues and profits along with the general price level. The key is systematic accumulation through dollar cost averaging. Instead of letting money sit in savings accounts losing purchasing power, invest a fixed amount every month into a diversified portfolio of dividend aristocrats. This approach eliminates timing risk while ensuring that your money is working to maintain and grow your purchasing power. The second strategy is real estate investment trusts that own essential properties with built-in inflation protection. Not retail rights or office rights that face structural headwinds, but rights that own warehouses, data centers, cell phone towers, healthcare facilities, and residential properties in growing markets. These properties generate rental income that typically rises with inflation through lease escalations and periodic rent resets. When the cost of everything else goes up, landlords can raise rents to maintain their profit margins. This makes quality REITs natural inflation hedges that convert your idle cash into income-producing assets that grow with the economy. Look for REITs with strong balance sheets, diversified tenant bases, and properties in markets with supply constraints. Geographic diversification is important too, since some markets will perform better than others over long periods. The goal is steady income that grows over time, not speculation on property price appreciation. The third strategy is Treasury inflation-protected securities, known as TIPS, but only for the portion of your portfolio that you need to keep absolutely safe. TIPS adjust their principal value based on inflation, ensuring that your purchasing power is preserved even if inflation accelerates beyond current levels. While TIPS won't make you rich, they serve as the foundation of a portfolio designed to preserve wealth during inflationary periods. Think of TIPS as your emergency fund that maintains its real value instead of losing purchasing power in savings accounts. Ladder TIPS with different maturity dates to provide regular cash flows and reinvestment opportunities. The fourth strategy is physical precious metals, specifically gold and silver, as insurance against currency collapse and systemic financial breakdown. This isn't about speculation on metal prices. It's about having assets that maintain value if paper currencies fail or government policies become even more destructive to savers. Allocate 5 to 10% of your portfolio to physical metals stored in secure facilities. This provides portfolio insurance that has worked for thousands of years through every type of monetary crisis. When currencies fail, precious metals become the ultimate store of value that can't be printed, manipulated, or confiscated easily. The fifth strategy is international diversification through foreign dividend stocks and REITs, particularly in countries with stronger fiscal positions and more conservative monetary policies than the United States. Countries like Switzerland, Norway, Singapore, and Australia have lower debt levels and more sustainable economic policies. International investments provide currency diversification, which protects against dollar debasement. When the dollar weakens due to money printing and fiscal irresponsibility, assets denominated in stronger currencies maintain or increase their dollar value. This adds another layer of protection against domestic policy mistakes. The sixth strategy is systematic debt elimination, which provides guaranteed returns that often exceed what you can earn safely on cash investments. If you have mortgage debt at 4% interest, paying it down provides a guaranteed 4% return with no risk. Compare that to savings accounts paying 2% and losing purchasing power to inflation. Eliminating debt also reduces your monthly cash flow requirements, which makes it easier to maintain your lifestyle on a fixed income. Lower fixed expenses provide financial flexibility that becomes increasingly valuable during periods of economic uncertainty and inflation. But here's the crucial part that most people get wrong. You can't implement these strategies all at once without creating unnecessary risk. The transition from idle cash to productive assets needs to be systematic and gradual to avoid buying everything at temporarily high prices. Here's my recommended implementation timeline. Start immediately by redirecting all new savings into dividend growth stocks instead of cash accounts. This ensures that new money goes directly into inflation-fighting assets without requiring you to sell existing positions. Over the next 6 months, gradually reduce your cash positions to no more than 6 months of living expenses. Deploy the excess cash into REITs and TIPS based on your risk tolerance and income requirements. Keep enough cash for emergencies and opportunities, but eliminate wasteful cash hoarding. Over the following 6 months, add international diversification and precious metals to complete your inflation-fighting portfolio. This gradual approach allows you to dollar cost average into these positions while learning about each asset class before committing significant capital. The key principle is that every dollar should have a specific purpose and investment objective. Emergency funds go into TIPS or high-yield savings accounts. Growth capital goes into dividend stocks and REITs. Insurance money goes into precious metals. Working capital for businesses or opportunities stays in short-term instruments that can be accessed quickly. But avoiding idle money doesn't mean taking unnecessary risks. The goal is to match your investment time horizon and risk tolerance with appropriate asset classes that provide inflation protection. Conservative investors should emphasize TIPS, dividend aristocrats, and stable REITs. Growth-oriented investors can add more international exposure and higher growth dividend stocks. The biggest mistake people make is analysis paralysis. They research endlessly, but never actually move money out of wealth-destroying cash positions. Perfect timing doesn't exist, but the cost of waiting while inflation erodes purchasing power is enormous and measurable. Start with what you understand and feel comfortable implementing. If you understand dividend stocks, start there while learning about REITs and TIPS. If real estate makes sense to you, start with REITs while researching dividend investing. The important thing is to start moving money into productive assets immediately. Another common mistake is trying to time markets by waiting for lower prices. While this seems prudent, it often results in keeping money idle indefinitely while waiting for perfect buying opportunities that never come. Dollar cost averaging eliminates this problem by investing systematically regardless of current market levels. The tax implications of moving money out of idle accounts need consideration too. Different asset classes have different tax treatments, and the order in which you implement these strategies can affect your tax efficiency. Dividend stocks and REITs held in taxable accounts benefit from favorable tax rates. TIPS and precious metals might be better held in tax-deferred accounts. Work with qualified tax and financial advisors to optimize the implementation for your specific situation. The goal is maximum after-tax purchasing power preservation, not maximum gross returns. Sometimes paying taxes on gains is better than losing purchasing power to inflation while trying to avoid all taxes. Now let me address the most common objections I hear when I tell people to stop keeping money idle. These objections reveal fundamental misunderstandings about risk, safety, and wealth preservation that keep people trapped in wealth-destroying strategies. Understanding why these objections are wrong could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars in purchasing power over the coming decade. The first objection is that stocks and REITs are too risky compared to cash and bonds. This reveals a dangerous confusion between volatility and risk. Volatility is short-term price fluctuations that don't affect long-term wealth if you don't sell during temporary declines. Risk is the permanent loss of purchasing power, which is exactly what happens when you keep money in cash during inflationary periods. Here's a concrete example. If you had $100,000 in savings accounts 5 years ago, earning 2% annually, you would have about $110,000 today. But that money would buy what approximately $75,000 bought 5 years ago due to inflation. That's a 25% loss in real purchasing power despite positive nominal returns. Compare that to someone who invested the same $100,000 in dividend aristocrat stocks 5 years ago. Despite multiple market corrections and volatility, they would likely have over $150,000 today, plus growing dividend income that has kept pace with inflation. The seemingly riskier strategy actually preserved and grew purchasing power. The second objection is that people need cash for emergencies and opportunities. This is absolutely true, but most people keep far more cash than necessary for legitimate emergency needs. 6 months of living expenses in emergency funds is reasonable. Keeping 2 or 3 years of expenses in cash is wealth destruction disguised as prudence. Moreover, true emergency funds should be in inflation-protected instruments like TIPS or I-bonds rather than savings accounts that lose purchasing power. Emergency funds that lose real value every year aren't actually preserving your financial security, they're slowly eroding it. The third objection is that this advice only works for wealthy people who can afford to take risks. This is completely backwards. Wealthy people have diversified income sources, business interests, and large portfolios that can withstand some losses. Middle class and working people who depend primarily on savings for financial security can least afford to have that money lose purchasing power through inflation. A middle class family with $50,000 in savings being eroded by inflation faces a much bigger threat to their financial stability than a wealthy family with $2 million invested in diversified assets. The wealthy family's wealth is growing and protected. The middle class family's security is being quietly destroyed. The fourth objection is that inflation is temporary and will return to normal levels soon. This reveals a dangerous misunderstanding of current economic conditions. The inflation we're experiencing isn't cyclical, it's structural. Government debt levels, money printing, Demographic pressures and supply chain disruptions are permanent features of the current economic landscape. Even if measured inflation decreases temporarily, the underlying pressures for currency debasement and financial repression will continue for decades. The mathematical reality of government finances ensures that savers will continue being penalized through negative real interest rates and purchasing power erosion. The fifth objection is that these strategies are too complicated for ordinary investors to implement. This is false. Buying dividend aristocrat index funds, RET index funds, and Treasury inflation-protected securities requires no special expertise. These investments are as simple to purchase as opening a savings account, but they provide inflation protection that savings accounts can't offer. The complexity isn't in implementation, it's in overcoming psychological barriers and conventional wisdom that no longer applies to current economic conditions. Most people can learn the basics of inflation-fighting investing in a few hours of research and start implementing immediately. Let me show you specific examples of how to implement these strategies with different amounts of money. If you have $10,000 sitting idle, put $3,000 into a dividend aristocrat index fund, $2,000 into a REIT index fund, $3,000 into tips, and keep $2,000 in high-yield savings for short-term needs. If you have $50,000 idle, put $20,000 into dividend aristocrats, $12,000 into REITs, $10,000 into tips, $3,000 into international dividend funds, $2,000 into precious metals, and keep $3,000 in cash. This provides diversification while ensuring most of your money is working to preserve purchasing power. If you have $100,000 or more idle, you can implement the full strategy with meaningful allocations to all 6 asset categories. The larger your portfolio, the more important diversification becomes, but the basic principle remains the same. Most of your money should be in assets that maintain their value during inflationary periods. The key is starting immediately with whatever amount you have available. Don't wait until you have enough money to implement a perfect allocation. Start with what you have and add to positions systematically as more money becomes available. Time in inflation-fighting assets is more important than timing the perfect entry points. Here's what I want you to understand about the urgency of this situation. Every month you wait, you lose purchasing power that you can never recover. Inflation compounds just like investment returns, but in reverse. Small purchasing power losses compound into massive wealth destruction over time. If inflation runs at 6% annually and you're earning 2% in savings accounts, you're losing 4% of your wealth every year. Over 10 years, that compounds to a 33% loss in purchasing power. Over 20 years, it's a 55% loss. Your money becomes worth less than half of its original purchasing power. But the mathematical destruction is actually worse because inflation tends to accelerate during periods of currency debasement. As governments print more money and run larger deficits, inflation pressures increase exponentially rather than linearly. What starts as manageable purchasing power erosion can quickly become devastating wealth destruction. The people who understand this and act early will preserve and grow their wealth during this transition. The people who cling to old-fashioned notions about safe investments will watch their financial security evaporate slowly but steadily. There will be no dramatic crash to wake them up, just gradual impoverishment that they don't fully recognize until it's too late to recover. This isn't about getting rich or making spectacular investment returns. This is about not getting poor through currency debasement and financial ignorance. The goal is to maintain your purchasing power and standard of living while the majority of savers see their wealth quietly confiscated through inflation and negative real interest rates. Here's my challenge for you. Calculate exactly how much money you have sitting in cash, savings accounts, money market funds, and low-yield bonds. Then calculate how much purchasing power you're losing annually if inflation continues at current levels. That number should shock you into immediate action. Pick one of the strategies I've outlined and implement it this week. Open a brokerage account and buy Dividend Aristocrat Index funds. Research REIT funds and Treasury inflation-protected securities. Visit a precious metals dealer and buy physical gold or silver. Do something concrete to start protecting your wealth instead of just thinking about it. If this message has opened your eyes to the hidden destruction happening to your idle money, share this video with everyone you know who needs this information. Subscribe subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell because I'll continue providing strategies for protecting wealth during this period of economic chaos. Leave a comment below and tell me how much money you have sitting idle and which strategy you're going to implement first. The community of people who understand these threats needs to help each other navigate the challenging economic environment we're facing. Remember, traditional financial advice assumes economic conditions that no longer exist. Low inflation, positive real interest rates, stable currencies, and fiscally responsible governments. Those conditions ended years ago, but most people are still following advice designed for a different economic reality. The choice is simple, but not easy. You can continue following conventional wisdom and watch your wealth erode gradually but permanently, or you can adapt to current economic conditions and deploy your money into assets that preserve and grow purchasing power during inflationary periods. Your financial future depends on understanding that cash is no longer king. In 2026, cash is a melting ice cube that shrinks every day you hold it. The question isn't whether you can afford to move money out of idle positions. The question is whether you can afford not to. Stop letting your money die a slow death in accounts that can't keep up with the real cost of living. Start protecting your wealth today because every day you wait makes recovery harder and more expensive.